coordinates. All right, and I would like to welcome all our participants, and of course, I would like to welcome you, our speakers, and I would like to thank you for accepting my invitation. All five of you, you have a different angle, and we will look differently today on the same subject. The subject of today is the world, which is now, which we have now, and this post-COVID investment strategies and opportunities. And we decided to start this conversation with a general overview and how the world is after this COVID-19, and how is the changing economy, and who are the winners versus the losers. So what is the program of our event? First, we will have 5 speeches, and our speakers know that I kindly ask them to have the speech within 7 minutes. So it will take us 35 minutes altogether. I have a nice timer here, maybe a little bit outdated, but it's tea timer. So when I do like this, 5 minutes, I will know that 5 minutes passed. We have 7 minutes each, and speakers knows who will have speeches after who, and then we'll have an important part of our today's meeting is panel discussion. So I would like to share opinions, to comment the other speeches, and I urge our attendees to type their questions to the chat, so during panel discussion we can also answer their questions. So without further delay, I would like to thank our sponsors, Sberbank Private Banking, ATG Fund Services, Astrobank, PwC Cyprus for supporting this event, for making it happening. And I would like to give the floor and the possibility to talk first to our first speaker and panelist, Mr. Marios Dimitriadis. He is the managing partner of MD Mindset Capital and former Minister of Communication and Works. And today we have the subject, the general subject regarding the COVID. Mr. Dimitriadis, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So I only have 7 minutes, so I tend to keep my time. So I'm just going to share basically some slides with you. So starting from the beginning, I would like to cover in today's presentation 3 areas. Basically, who are the winners and who are the losers from this crisis? Because in every crisis, of course, there are always winners and losers. Whether COVID-19 has signaled a further blow towards globalization, and what are the possible long-term impacts on economies? And I would say a couple of things on Cyprus as well. So going to the winners and the losers. So if you think about it, everybody understands that basically what has happened has promoted the use of online services. So we see companies operating the entertainment sector like Netflix and Disney Plus and all these other companies registering millions of new users because people have stopped going to cinemas, and of course they do prefer to stay at home and have their entertainment there. We also see a lot of promotion of education apps like Zoom, the one that we're currently using. So we see companies that used to have like a small capitalization, suddenly the capitalization increasing tenfold. And of course, these will probably be the big winners for the future as well. I was actually in a discussion about startups about a month ago, and there was one of these people, one of these venture capital, one of these startup companies that basically has software for online teaching. It was saying that after COVID-19, their clients have increased 100 times. Other companies like DocuSign, Five9, all these companies, they have to do with basically enabling people working from home. So these companies have benefited from work as well. So also the sector of e-commerce, of course, companies like Amazon have benefited a lot as people have started or have accelerated using technology or online sites to buy things. And generally speaking, of course, the healthcare sector, we do understand that not only companies that are investigating vaccines for COVID-19, but also generally speaking, people, and I think countries have decided to spend more on healthcare. So we see what is happening in the European Union, where people countries can get money from the ESM, can borrow money from the ESM for healthcare spending. So healthcare spending will definitely increase more in the future. Now, in the loser side, of course, generally speaking, the logistics side, they are definitely a loser, and the autos. And starting with the airlines, everybody understands what has happened to the airlines. Only Europe, they are expected to lose about 15.4 billion because of the pandemic. A lot of companies will go down. This basically comes after a long period where airlines benefited from the growth. I think it will take some years for the traffic to go where it used to be before. The shipping sector has also, of course, suffered. The WTO estimates that there will be a decrease in world trade between 13 and 32%. So apart from tankers that benefited from storing oil because of the crisis in the oil prices, all the rest are suffering this year. And of course, it will take some time for them to recover. Now, another two sectors that would definitely suffer, the sector of real estate, not only short term, but also long term. If we think about it, the office space, the need for office space will decrease. I mean, like companies like Facebook have announced that within the next 5 years, 50% of their employees will work from home. There will be more companies like this. So generally speaking, there will be less need for office space. Also, shopping malls. So there will be less need for brick and mortars. And finally, consumer discretionary, because of the recession, people would decrease their spending. Now, moving fast to the issue of globalization, Mr. Modi, who is a big defender of globalization, he said at Davos that basically globalization is slowly losing its luster and that protectionism is gaining ground. And that was a question posed by economists as well. Globalization is already suffering from the Sino-American trade war. Okay, the tariffs have decreased from what they used to be, but they are still 5 times of what they were before Mr. Trump was elected. So now with COVID-19, we see that countries are becoming more protectionist for their national champions. Actually, they're putting money into their national champions. So expect that they will promote more the use of national champions. Also, countries, they are starting to divert their reliance from a single country. And of course, this is expected to affect negatively more China. So we will see people having a number of supply countries and not relying on one country. And of course, the other thing, there will be more bans on traveling. So we see that there will be category A countries, category B. We see this thing happening already in Cyprus. Of course, the impact is not likely to be clear until the end of 2020. Now, moving to the third area, just to say something very brief about Cyprus. Cyprus will be affected more than other countries because of our heavy reliance on tourists. And of course, the banking sector, which is still very large in Cyprus compared to the size of the economy, will be affected even more because we haven't solved the problem of NPLs yet. And I mean, you know, let's accept that there will be an increase in NPLs from this crisis. And of course, we'll have a banker today who will do a speech about it. So he's more of an expert than me. Now, moving forward, generally, we have to, and everybody realize that we are witnessing a so-called technology leap. Technology leap doesn't mean that everybody will be using only digital services from now on, but it means that instead of a growth of, let's say, 3 or 4% or 5% of people using technology, there will be a growth of 10%. So this is called a technology leap. So more people will be using technology as a result of COVID-19, irrespective of whether we find a vaccine in the next, I don't know, 10, 12 months. Also, the healthcare sector will benefit as people realize that we cannot ignore isolated pandemics. I mean, don't forget that like this COVID-19 and the coronavirus is not something new, but people were saying it's isolated, it's only in Asia, and they were not giving the right attention. There will be less need for brick and mortar. And of course, people will need to invest more in what is needed for digitization, like telecom infrastructure. So despite of what they say about 5G, expect that there will be an accelerated use of 5G. Finally, we will see a shifting of supply chain. We will not see a decrease of world trade long term, but the supply chain will change as people will, as I said before, rely more on an increasing number of countries instead of only one country. So I have included a couple of slides about Cyprus. I do believe in general that Cyprus needs to decrease its reliance on tourists, and this time in a more organized way than before. I do believe that Cyprus will benefit from the increased use of head office because people will be able to work more and it would be acceptable for people to work from home or from remote locations. And of course, this will decrease the disadvantage that Cyprus has with the less connectivity. Of course, this will get even worse now. So Cyprus will benefit provided we take the right steps in increasing this connectivity. So generally speaking, as a conclusion, I would say that this crisis will be probably worse than originally predicted. Technology leap benefits can be significant for countries that adopt new technologies, and countries will try and benefit from new trends. So instead of arguing about things about how we're going to give state guarantees about banks, I will let George expand on that. We should try and benefit from this, although I do believe that state guarantees is definitely something that should take place. And I do believe in general about Cyprus that we are entering the crisis in a relatively good position. But if we are not careful about our economics, I think this can easily be reversed. And also, we need to focus now on how we can benefit from this crisis and stop, just handing out checks to people like we did before and was a failed strategy. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marius, for this introduction and this general presentation. And I asked our next speaker, Mr. Golosov, so I'll make sure that everything is fine and unmuted. So Mr. Golosov to continue, and he will speak about current crisis versus history and the recovery shape and behavioral changes, challenging going forward, and also identifying the dark horses. So I would like to introduce to you our next speaker, Mr. Dmitry Golosov, the head of investment advice in CIB Cyprus Limited. Dmitry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to outline certain peculiarities which current crisis have, because basically first time ever in the history of economic observation when the crisis hit simultaneously on supply and demand side. First of all, usually macroeconomists use the method of finding similar trends in the past and then trying to conclude that in the future we may have a similar outcome. In the current situation, it's impossible to do because all the crises for at least the 20th century were driven by a different reason. Therefore, it's important to outline the most important feature of the crisis, and that would also affect our discussion about the recovery and about the losing and winning sector, is lightning fast increase of the world's debt because of the current crisis. Here it's very important to mention that the fact itself of the debt, as we've seen on the example of Japan and America as well, is not something really bad or good by itself. The point is though that the ratio of credit growth, the ability of country to produce more debt, is directly impacting the ratio of economy growth. Therefore, if currently we kind of push the pedal to maximum, that will definitely limit our ability to grow the economy further worldwide. Apart of that, apart of the debt, the important thing is to notice in all the countries, again, we're talking about the worldwide trends here, that we have crazy state spending. And another important thing that despite all globalization effort, all those particular country efforts, particular blocks efforts are not synchronized. We have record high fiscal programs of support, we have record quantity easing, both in US and European Union. Therefore, the thing you, Natalia, mentioned before we started about inflation. Inflation is not only about amount of money, inflation is also about how fast money turns in the economy. So if people are sitting home and they're receiving money in cash like they do in America, for example, it still doesn't mean the inflation gonna rise because the point is, you know, how fast you're gonna spend it and how much it will turn the economy. One can expect, and again, that's something which Marius mentioned already, that we're going to see the increase in global protectionism, which we've seen already in the previous years, but that's going to intensify. So in general, how to say, going forward, speaking not about particular sectors, but about the direction where we should look into, more of a local stories. The global corporations, if they want to stay competitive, they would have to make in-house production in each of the key countries of their distribution. It's going to be increasingly more difficult to find stories by yourself, which would, how to say, which would be so obvious like it was before. Another important thing to mention is that up until now, the difference between conservative and aggressive strategies was pretty tiny. So the person taking additional risk would add 2-3% historically to their portfolio. Now the importance of the portfolio management gonna rise significantly. In average, this conservative and aggressive strategy going to be more than 10%. Therefore, you know, the standard approach, let's just buy some fixed income in my conservative portfolio, will not work. So we're going to have an era now of low rates or even negative rates. Therefore, the mastership of building the portfolio, of looking after the market, of seeing the trends becoming more and more important. I would want to share just one picture, actually. There is no need for the whole presentation. Just to show you current growth, what we've seen now in the last 2 months, what it's driven by. That's basically 2 graphs, very simple. The accumulated graph of stocks performance and the accumulated World Central Bank balance sheet. As you see, from after the middle of March, when we see the biggest crash, the whole growth was driven by the central bank programs, quantitative easing, fiscal policies, and spending. Therefore, again, going forward, we can forget about the inflation, the huge amount of world debt, the quality of fixed income will split to 2 big groups. It will be very conservative instruments with very low yield and all the rest. And the spread between those two will be much more than what we've seen before. So speaking about the recovery, okay, in the graph I just showed you, some can see the V-shaped recovery, but we should understand what it was driven by. And second, that the right leg of V is kind of shorter than the left one. So it definitely will take time. When we talk about the possible winners sector-wise, irrespective of the geographical location, adding on top of what Marius mentioned already, because there's no missing things, I also want to mention that not only retail, but any staples retail and household chemicals retail will be on the rise, because, you know, people behavior-wise are in stress. They will remember the stress for a long time, and most probably that's going to drive their consumer behavior going forward. As odd as it sounds, because we're going to see a lot of non-performing loans, as Marius.
I just want to remind you about time. 7 minutes past. We need to summarize the things, and maybe the rest of the things to be told over the panel discussion.
Yeah, sure. So basically, debt collection, as odd as it sounds, insurance companies, I can explain more in panel session why I believe it's going to be an interesting debt. Food tech technologies, cyber sport, utilities, and computer technologies in more wider range, which I will elaborate more in the panel session when we're going to discuss about that in the particular sector.
And I kindly ask you to mention about dark horses, because these dark horses was interesting subject for all other our friends and panelists. When they read the descriptions, they were asking me, what is this, and can they also mention it? What did you mean about the dark horses?
Well, dark horse by definition is basically the horse which nobody believes on, but must to win the race. So essentially, when we're talking about the possible winning sectors, certain things are on the surface, right? I mean, IT stuff, telecoms, utilities, gold maybe. So it's going to be crowded trades by definition. So the dark horse is something which may not be so obvious at the beginning. But if you're the one who's going to make a bet first on it, you're going to win.
That's great. All right, thank you very much, Dmitry, for your intervention. And I would like us to continue our conversation. And now I kindly ask Mr. Andreas Asinodorou, who is the CEO of ATG Funds, founding member and board member and chairman of the Fund Administration Services Committee in Cyprus Investment Fund Association. And we will continue. We will speak about shaping new reality. So Andres, I will unmute you now. Can you unmute yourself as well? Yes.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Natalia. Good morning to all the panelists and all the participants. Actually, when you invited me to participate, I was very much drawn to the idea of black horses because it gives me the opportunity to look at the positive side of all these crises. Because I mean, the picture, if you look at it in terms of numbers, is pretty gloomy. But when I look at the COVID as an opportunity, I see a new shaping reality. And because we are in the middle of this new shaping reality with a destination unknown, it creates a lot of uncertainty at all levels: investors, governments, banks. So I want to analyze this so that we see if there is something positive that can come out of it and what we can do in terms of supporting our investors. The first thing that I want to say is that COVID is creating a paradigm shift. What we consider safe is no longer safe. Think about an airport. An airport used to be the safest place before. Today, the airport is definitely not a safe place, or somebody's going to think about it twice. That means that a lot of the opportunities are definitely going to live outside our comfort zone or what we are used to. COVID is also bringing us or reminding us of certain truths. The first one is that we are all interconnected. So whatever problems we are facing, we should try and find the solutions, not in the isolation of a single country or a single group, but we should see the interconnectedness across countries and economies. And the other one is that as humans, we cannot escape the grip of nature. So nature is definitely something that should be taken into consideration with all these investment opportunities that may be coming on. My reading in the last few days actually brought me across a number of studies, and scientists and academics are talking about 8 major trends. And these 8 major trends are creating dynamics for clear winners and clear losers. Actually, these trends support very much what Mario said in terms of winners and losers and what Dimitri mentioned, but I will briefly go through them. COVID has changed the way that we work. So remote working versus office working, clear winners are collaboration tools on the internet as opposed to shared workspace, physical workspace, which is a clear loser. COVID is changing the way that we shop. COVID is changing the way that we watch things. It's quite interesting to see the increase in Netflix and online viewing as opposed to people going out to theaters, cinemas, and even cultural things like ballet. COVID is changing the way that we share things. So there is a tremendous need for big data, higher speeds, and cybersecurity. It changes the way that we perceive travel. So even the way that we will plan our holidays, or even the quality of how we want to spend our 1 or 2 weeks abroad. It changes the way that we focus on healing. So there is a tremendous shift towards online medical services, medical records online, even technology tracking contacts of people to ensure that we're safe. It changes the way that we focus on learning. So we see today that the losers are the institutions that cannot support technology, and the clear winners are not the ones that can only support technology, but they give the students the option to pick and choose the subjects that they want to learn. And then it changes the way that we trade. Protectionism on the one hand, but at the same time, strategic procurement. You know, the need for safety, for food security, water security, and medical supply security has become critical. If I put all these trends on the table, there is an interesting picture that is emerging, which is that the consumer and the social change is actually coming much faster than any form of economic recovery. So it's not the economic recovery that is fueling all this, but it's the consumer and the social needs that is driving the recovery. And this is quite an interesting parameter to take into account when trying to identify investment opportunities. The trend is digital. So COVID is not going to halt the fourth industrial revolution. As a matter of fact, COVID is actually bringing it closer much faster. But the concept of interconnectedness is actually opening up the idea of impact investments. You know, I'm old enough to remember the times when people used to smoke on aeroplanes. And we were under the illusion that if you're sitting on the right row, you will be safe from the smoke of somebody sitting on the wrong row. Try and apply that in flying on a plane with somebody that may be a COVID carrier. So a lot of people, especially institutional investors, have been avoiding or not looking very seriously at impact investments that have a bigger impact on social communities, healthcare, caring for the elder, but also the environment. This, I believe, is something that is going to change. We are beginning to see a lot of investors actually looking at impact investment in turning the oceans blue again and converting plastic into energy and clearing up the environment, which is definitely going to present a lot of opportunities. I want to qualify my ideas and my...
To summarize, yes, to summarize the speech, and then the rest which you wanted to say but you didn't, we will move it to the panel discussion.
In summary, I believe that by looking at the trends and by looking at the dynamics of the new industry, we can methodically identify which are the smart businesses, who are the investors, and who are the innovators that can actually drive this investment forwards. And this is where we should search for our black horses for our clients. And definitely Cyprus has a lot to benefit from that by acting as a bridge for this kind of structuring of investments.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this. And positive side at the end that Cyprus is. And so, all right, we will move to the next speech. And I would like to invite to this virtual floor, Mr. George Appius, who is the Deputy Managing Director, member of the Executive Committee of Astrobank. And we will speak, the title of his speech is Making Sure That There Is a Garden Will Blossom Again and the Sun Returns. So, Mr. Appius, we would like to see and to hear some positive things about sun returning. So we need to switch on the microphone for you. Let me try it. Unmute, should work. Yes, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalia, for the opportunity. As you know, I'm not directly dealing with private banking clients or fund management and investment strategies. My expertise is mostly on general commercial banking. But when one talks about investment strategies, it is very important to consider the blend between equity investment and debt. The higher the debt, the higher the IRR of the investment, and the debt element is the part that I understand very well and where I would focus on today. Among other things, investment strategies will need to consider debt financing and who provides the debt. In the majority of the cases, it's banks. The implementation of the strategy will definitely need an environment where there is definitely government commitment and a robust banking system. So at this point of time, these two elements are seriously tested because they are the ones that control the money supply and they keep the liquidity flowing. And I think the expansion of the money supply is the way to manage this crisis. And obviously, this is what is being implemented so far as the solution. I know Dimitri's comments about the increase in the global debt and how this will eventually affect the sustainability of the growth and how the velocity of money will also affect inflation. But I say, let's expand the money supply, get the momentum going, and we will fix anything else later, because now the patient needs a jump start, and that's what we should do. But let me clarify that there is two things, and not just one, when we talk about the money supply and liquidity. I remember a Greek banker during the Greek financial crisis who was asked by a journalist, why don't you open the tap so that liquidity flows in the economy, they asked him. And he replied, my friend, the tap is wide open. It's just that the water has run out. So there's two elements. The tap must be open and there must be water in the reservoir. So let's see what is being done by banks and governments to keep money flowing. The objective is twofold: to help the existing enterprises with their working capital needs and cover the losses that were created because of the event, and also assist the investors to leverage their capital and achieve their strategies so that they can invest money in the economy, the real economy. The tool here is money supply expansion. Some governments, like the USA, took the road of printing more money and supporting the economic activity by financing the losses caused by the COVID, mainly through grants. As a result, the US money supply went up by 17% in just the 5 months since the beginning of the year. And just to put this into context, the last 5 years, the average annual money supply expansion in the US was 5 to 6%. It is clear that the US is going out with a bazooka and that there will be no shortage of liquidity in the US in the post-COVID era, not just for covering losses, but also for new investments. Now, looking at Europe, that is closer to home, the EU has taken a different approach from the US. The EU money supply which used to increase by 4 to 5% before the crisis, has increased by 7 to 8% since the beginning of this year. So not a spectacular 17%, but definitely a noticeable increase in the money supply in the EU member states. So the EU Commission last week has made a historic announcement, a 500 billion recovery fund available to member state governments. We have not seen this kind of solidarity since the birth of the European Union. The EU government commitment is therefore evident. To add to this, a number of relaxations were also provided by the EU Commission to member states, allowing them to increase their borrowing and temporarily provide state aid towards various segments in various ways, like the government guarantee schemes, subsidy schemes, and the like. And all member states have taken the opportunity and have or are in the process of introducing various government schemes to support the recovery. I'm focusing on the global issue and not just Cyprus. The ECB, the European Central Bank, has complemented this expansion of the money supply by providing ample quantitative easing and liquidity to state member government bonds. In parallel, the EU is looking at its strong banking system to aid the recovery. And this is different from the US and other countries. I think this is a wiser approach, because the total debt that will be increased, as Dimitris mentioned, will eventually be shared between the public and the private sector. So there may be a balance there, but not in all countries. I'm focusing in the European Union. In a perverse way, for once, we have to be thankful to regulators, because they had the foresight after the last financial crisis of 2008 to introduce the single supervisory mechanism with the objective to make the European banking system fit and strong. The result of introduced measures was not just a complex and common rule book, but also the supervisor pushing all the EU banks for higher capital ratios by introducing buffers. This led to increases in capital ratios in the European banks by about 30% in the last 5 years. We're talking now about ratios of 16 to 18%. And this robustness means that the European banks can now absorb the shocks of the crisis and assist the recovery for the crisis. So what did the European Bank do? The European Central Bank, they announced on the 12th of March that they have relaxed the capital buffers for the European banks and some other prudential liquidity requirements. And this means that the European banks are now able to lend about 1.3 trillion euros to customers that need the liquidity. The ECB announcement did not just refer to working capital needs and covering losses. It also referred to investments in the real economy, because that's the way out of the crisis. The move ensures that the European banks will be allowed to operate below their required capital adequacy ratios so that they can use the liquidity to fund and fuel the recovery. So in conclusion, in 2018, we went into a global financial crisis because of the weaknesses of our banks and oversights by our regulators. We will come out of the 2020 global financial crisis because of our strong banks and our diligent regulators. The response from the member state governments and the European Central Bank was quick, and in my opinion, if the pandemic control results continue in the same trends, it will also prove sufficient to push the European economy out of the crisis. The investment strategies that you will be pursuing will eventually be complemented by the debt funding required. And I am confident that the dark horses of Dimitris and their breeders will find the financing support that they need to surprise the market and win the race. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, George, for this intervention. And now I would like to have our last speech, which will in a way give us more information, because I'm looking now for the presentation that will focus on examining some of the issues which are likely to shape global economic development and impact investment decisions in the foreseeable future. So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Omeros Pisaridis, the Managing Director of PwC Investment Services, Cyprus Limited, and the member of the Board of Directors of PwC Fund Fund Services Limited. So Mr. Pisaridis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you also to everybody who's watching us. Well, they say that you should not come between a person and their lunch, so I am the last speaker and we are approaching lunchtime, so I will try to keep it short. So what I wanted to talk to you about today relates to a number of issues which are likely to shape the economic developments and therefore impact the investment decisions in the foreseeable future. The truth of the matter is that COVID-19 has exacerbated some of these issues, but in reality, most of them have pre-existed and they will continue to be with us for a long time. So the first issue that I want to focus on is that of economic growth, or better, lack of it. COVID-19, no doubt, everybody knows that it has had a very significant negative and also uneven impact on a worldwide scale, but we tend to forget that the global scene was characterized by slowing growth already in almost all of the major economies. So the response of most countries, including the Eurozone and the United States, was the pursuance of expansionary monetary policies, manifested in practice by low or even negative interest rates and the provision of low-cost and ample liquidity. What was the result of that? Well, we saw compression of bond yields, even for jurisdictions, corporations considered as high risk. We saw extraordinary increases in the prices of listed stocks, the possibility of bubbles in real estate, and challenging times for the profitability of banks. Now, don't get me wrong, we needed an expansionary monetary policy before and certainly during the COVID-19 crisis, and such a policy has many positive effects, including repayment of government and sovereign bonds, as well as the refinancing of debt at affordable levels. Overall, however, attention must be paid to its negative side effects, especially the distortion of prices and their misalignment with fundamentals, which are key considerations for investment decisions. So far from being dogmatic, what I am saying is that we must also remember that monetary policy has its limits, notably in keeping inflation in check from a medium and long-term perspective. The second point I want to mention, I think it was touched upon before, relates to rising global debt. Now, a number of economists have been warning us that we are drowning in debt. Now, putting cries of pessimism aside, it may be difficult to disagree with that. When the world's total debt rose to $250 trillion and the global debt to GDP ratio is slightly more than 320% in 2019. Again, however, we must be realistic. During the COVID-19 period, borrowing was very much what is called a necessary evil. Many countries, including our native Cyprus, successfully issued sovereign bonds, and rightfully so. Nevertheless, the mountain of debt will not go away after COVID-19 leaves us, and one would hope that the governments would turn a deaf ear to populist demands and inject the amounts borrowed in sectors that will improve long-term efficiency and facilitate the repayment of debt. Sectors such as sustainable tourism, health infrastructure, distance learning, digitalization, and renewable forms of energy. If not, we may be poised for further uncertainty. The third point I would like to bring up relates to political leadership. It's always considered important within the scope of any investment decision, and the nature of the COVID-19 as a truly global disease has yielded a few noteworthy lessons. Firstly, if we look at the successful management of the crisis in countries like New Zealand, South Korea, Taiwan, Germany, Iceland, and dare I say Greece and Cyprus as well, a country's response during intense crises should be simultaneously timely and ambivalent in order to have a strong signaling effect on all economic agents. Secondly, the reality of the matter is that even economically advanced nations depend to an increasingly greater degree on supranational support, which is crucial in a globalized arena. In fact, one of the key messages that the pandemic has delivered is the credibility that accompanies a coordinated fiscal response, finally manifested within the European Union through the recent German-French 500 billion euros agreement, as has been mentioned before by Mr. Appios. Clearly, no country can go at it alone, even if it's the biggest economy in the world. Thirdly, a long-term relationship of trust between those in power and the citizens leads to more rational economic behavior and swifter response to unexpected shocks. In short, behavior of those who take strategic decisions is an important determinant for all those who take decisions at the micro level. Countries whose leadership understands this are likely to attract more investments. And if anybody has any doubts, I refer to the recent words of Yuval Noah Harari when he said that I would rather live in Greece than USA during the COVID-19 pandemic. So where does the above leave potential investors and where do the opportunities lie? Well, for sure, we are increasingly headed for interesting times. More and more funds need to be deployed in a world which is becoming even more interlinked and where the cost of doing business is constantly expanding due to increasing compliance, capital adequacy, and overall regulatory burden. What brews to the surface quite clearly for me is that the importance of fundamentals and the need to proactively and diligently assess every single investment is crucial. Granted, several sectors are poised for growth and that COVID-19 will provide a significant boost to the adoption of improved technological infrastructure, which will affect the sectors of health and social care, education, tourism, and leisure, the way in which we interact with the state, and many more. Judging, however, from previous points in history when opportunities seem to be abound, investors should ultimately be aware that there are no easy choices, no obvious horses to pick. In closing, I'm certain we have all heard that in the country where the COVID-19 emerged, the word crisis also means opportunity. I would like to leave you with the full Chinese proverb, which I think is very topical amidst the COVID-19 realities. The proverb goes like this: a crisis is an opportunity, but it is riding a dangerous wind. Let's keep this in mind for the day after and the way forward. Thank you for your attention. I hope this has been useful.
Thank you very much. Now I will switch on the gallery view, and I advise to all our participants and attendees to do this. So we say all of us at once, and also we need to unmute Mr. Pisaridis, Mr. Atsinadoro, Mr. Golosov, Mr. Apios, and Mr. Dimitriadis, so unmute yourself. Because now it's a time which is really precious. Now it's a time to discuss. And I would like to ask, do you have anything to comment to the speeches or information you heard from other panelists? Anyone want to comment our speeches so far?
Well, if I can start, basically not just to continue, just to mention certain things about horses and everything. The success of an investment in the long term is not about finding the investment ideas. The success of the investment is systematic risk management, which is done on the distance through diversification and at the moment in sizing. That's what I was mentioning before, saying that now it's even more demanding times with regards to the quality of the portfolio build and to the quality of the expertise being used. Because again, on the long term, the portfolios are successful not because you managed to buy first something which grew 50% next month. The quality on the long run is your resistance to the market drops and your ability to go through through the fall in certain sectors and certain names. So basically, it doesn't mean that in such a volatile time you have to sit on top of terminal and read all the news or make crazy investment ideas. It's about the discipline, and it's about the understanding the basics and better advanced principles of the portfolio theory and how the markets operate. Just to kick off the discussion about the things we didn't manage to cover in our discussion before, I wanted to say that there's certain things which may look ridiculous at the first point, but they indeed going to have a lot of business in upcoming years. For example, with APEC deal, which everybody's aware of, the sector which will benefit the most is obviously not oil companies, it's not the service companies, but rather than sector of the companies who are dealing with decommissioning of all deposits, because a lot of oil deposits have to be closed due to the lack of use. And within next 2 years, that's going to be really, really big business. Therefore, one may expect that anything in oil industry is not going to be in a good shape, but there are certain interesting ideas even there. The same goes for financial sector. We all read about NPLs. The debt collectors will be able to buy big chunks of debt with a huge discount and may benefit from the further recovery. So that's
NPLs, that was NPLs for a few years. Everyone is talking about this, and George can confirm that the companies are buying. But something which you mentioned now about oil, so that the companies that are closing these reservoirs will benefit. That's unusual. Andreas, Marius, George, Omiros, can you also contribute something, some industries or some fields of activities that are not on the surface, as Dmitry correctly said? We don't see them at once, but we can guess that maybe during these years they will benefit.
Well, if I can mention something that came across my desk in the last few days, and I consider that it has a huge impact and it could possibly be adopted in Cyprus. One of the big impacts of COVID is that there is no visitors to museums, there is no real income to people visiting all these masterpieces and art galleries. And at the same time, we have blockchain technology evolving on the other hand. So a group of innovators and group of technology guys came up with the idea of actually doing virtual tours of museums of their artwork, but also beyond that, creating digital image rights of all this that would generate a completely new stream of income to museums for the use of these art in a way that is patented for them. So it's not a matter of taking a piece of art and copying it, but it's a matter that the museum can actually have income from every single time that this image is used across the whole world.
And
Now,
that's great income because it's the rights of digital use. It means people will use them not hundreds of times, hundreds of thousand times. And even a small fee will be a big difference for such museums, correct?
yeah, of course. And then the digital experience is not just about looking at pictures. You can add the whole narrative about the history of every piece of artifact, or even entering into a virtual room and watching history in the making of every piece of art that you're looking at. So technology is offering some opportunities that are not clearly visible at the moment. And it only takes one or two, let's say, museums to invest little money by comparison to how much they're losing to create a whole new industry that will attract a lot of investments.
Mm-hmm. All right, do you want to add anything before I switch on into questions? We have 10 questions waiting in our question and answer tab. George, Marius, Omiros.
Well, one thing that I would add is that, COVID-19 has just accelerated some, developments which were bound to happen anyway. So we may be witnessing some changes right now, but ultimately we are still talking about, similar services and products that we had before. So, visiting a museum like what Andreas very correctly mentioned now, it used to be a real life experience. Now it can be a digital experience. Similarly, e-learning will become a thing of the future. I don't imagine, for example, that my grandchildren will have to go to university and physically be there, and so on and so forth. So I think one of the biggest opportunities, one of the biggest industries that will stand to benefit from the changes that are taking place right now is the information technology industry. We'll need many more processors, we'll need many more servers, we'll need the ability to store all of this data properly. So the IT industry stands to gain very, very significantly from what is happening. And the rest of the sectors may continue to do business with a different model, but ultimately, it may just be serving it in a different way. The IT industry, I think, stands to gain significantly, and obviously the benefits will filter down through all of us.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. So I will move then, if you allow me, to the questions, because we even have answered questions, not only open. Let me start with open questions. And some people thank us for this excellent initiative. Okay, so temporary, you can also read the questions, and I would like to provide guaranteed and sensitive to impact funds. Yeah, we had a few questions on investment funds, and maybe to Andreas, to Omiros, to everyone, the questions are, okay, let me find the, okay, what is a view of our panel relating the impact of COVID-19 on the Cyprus investment fund industry? What steps is Cyprus taking in developing the industry further? And we have also another question on the same topic. What is the impact on investment funds? Maybe Andreas, we'll start with you, and then anyone else can contribute.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to mention that also Marius is a specialist of the fund sector and one of the founding members of the Cyprus Investment Funds Association. So I'm glad that he's also on board in this discussion. I have always viewed the funds as a bridging tool between investors and investment opportunities. And one of the problems with funds is the timing between the idea of setting up a fund and actually making it work. If we can minimize this time, so from the time that somebody, a fund promoter comes up with the idea of setting up a fund, minimize the time until this fund is ready to be presented to investors, then this is going to put Cyprus clearly in a very advantageous position to some of its competitors. Things are moving very fast in the post-COVID period, so the time is of critical essence. The opportunities will not stand here for too long. The second thing is that the funds present a very good opportunity to institutionalize some of the alternative investments. Private equity that used to be done between family and friends or behind small corporate finance firms now can be readily available to institutional investors and be formally presented like a proper investment opportunity with KPIs and investment criteria. Cyprus is definitely one of the options in the alternative investment funds industry. There is still work to be done, but definitely an opportunity to invite a number of these investments to be structured by Cyprus.
All right, Mr. Marius.
Okay, even though I wanted to make a comment not about funds, but about something else. Generally speaking, I do believe that the fund industry is an industry which offers opportunity for Cyprus. I think Andreas put it very correctly about increasing the ability of the Cyprus regulatory infrastructure, in a way, regulatory infrastructure to accommodate this, because you have all these people who are trying to promote the sector. Obviously, if it takes a long time to approve a fund, it is a disadvantage. So we need to have some advantages over other countries. So imagine if we had the capacity to approve these funds much faster than other countries. You know, I think it would help all these professionals are out there to get the business in a way. Another comment I wanted to make generally about Cyprus, Natalia, it might sound a bit political, but I will say it. And I saw some of the questions that some of the attendants have put. Imagine the positive impact we would have in Cyprus if instead of handing checks to people, and I'm talking about the initiative of the government and what some of the parties have been asking the government to hand checks to small business, 2,000-3,000 euros to each of them. If the government invested this money in order to promote the creation of new businesses and promote Cyprus as an innovation and technology hub, the positive impact it would have and the positive multiplier in the economy. So, you know, if somebody thinks about it from an economist point of view, I think personally, this is my opinion, it would be the government needs to find ways to diversify the economy. And we have not seen anything yet from the government as a measure to diversify the economy from the traditional sectors. I do understand that, of course, all these small businesses need to survive. And the schemes that the government has done so far, they're very good, especially about the payment of salaries. I think those were excellent. But the government needs to come up with ways to benefit from the post-COVID-19 era and not just concentrate on basically the existing framework. So we need to see some of those initiatives.
All right, thank you very much. Any comments on this subject? Because my next question will be to Mr. Appius. There is a question about banking system, but anything else on this? Okay, then I will read it. Oh, I could open the whole screen. Okay, I didn't know this. Let me, okay. So how does the banking industry see the pullback of the legislation for governmental guarantees to the CY corporate world? Do they believe that this setback, I lost it, will increase the NPLs from existing loans granted by banks? George?
Yeah, the government guarantee scheme that was initiated by the government started, in my opinion, very well, because it came out very quickly. I mean, it was like the first week after the lockdown, and the government came out with a decree and a law. But then the system, the political system in Cyprus started intervening and putting wedges in the system. And every time you change a paragraph in a law, it may not be in harmony with the rest. And they created a monster eventually that the government itself realized that with all these changes, it will not work. So they pulled it back, because obviously the government did not want to take something to parliament that was not going to be voted, because if that happens, then it takes another 6 months after our constitution to be able to resubmit. So they pulled it back so that it doesn't get destroyed. So there may still be hope for the government guarantees, but our political system, with the government not having majority to do as they think right, and up to now, in my view, and I am not preaching for the political party that the government that supports the government has done all the right steps in all directions, both in the medical scientific side to take us to the results we have now, but also for the assistance they have given through the Ministry of Labor to everyone that could not work. And these are copies from other countries, but doesn't hurt copying so long as you do it correctly. And they also tried to copy the government guarantee scheme, but they got stuck because the parliament wouldn't take it through. I think there are other things that the temporary measures announced by the European Commission allow the government to do in order to aid and provide government assistance to the economy that otherwise they wouldn't be able to. And I think they will start looking at those tools, and we will have soon something coming out. And also they may be able to pull something from this, from the European Union directly from this fund, so that they don't have to go to the political system that may block things for their own reasons and get it through in the economy, because that is the intention. I think the government has seen the point of these measures. The political system has missed the point completely, completely missed the point. This is not the time for controls and extra controls and everything. Yes, we may have 100 cases and 10 of them may not be what they should be, but the important thing is to push the economy and get the momentum so that we don't get stuck in this, where is the money, where is the money? I think the central bank and the ECB have given enough tools to the banks to be able to support the economy themselves. So this is what the banks are doing now with some relaxations that we had from the Central Bank of Cyprus. There are easier processes that we can proceed and give money to the real economy. The pricing may be fit to the risk we are taking, and it may not be to the level that was envisaged by the politicians. But then again, the banks are private institutions and they need to price to risk.
Thank you, George. You know, when the conversation is interesting, the time flies. Now it's already 1 o'clock and 2 minutes, and we need to summarize these things. What I can promise to our attendees, we have many questions, and I told to my colleagues now that they copy all these questions. We will send them to our panelists, and whoever wants to reply the questions, they will reply. I take responsibility to summarize everything, and then in a couple of days, by the end of this week, dear participants, dear attendees, you will get a Word file or PDF file from us with answers to the questions. Now, I would like to suggest to our panelists to summarize today's event, but before they do so, I would like to announce the following. We want to try an unusual format now. You know that in the format of webinar, like now, we cannot see the attendees, we cannot talk to them, and what we would like to have is a coffee break. So when this event will be finished in 1, 2, 3 minutes after the summary, what you will need to do now, you see in our chat, my colleagues shared with you the link. So you copy this link, you paste it, you go out of this webinar, we finished, and you go to drink coffee somewhere else. It will be a link for a coffee break. And I think that out of our 100 attendees who were with us, about 30 people will come and share their views as well. All right, before coffee break, to summarize, let's summarize in the same order we had speeches. So, starting with Marius, what was important from what you heard today, and what you want our attendees to, when they finish this event, when they just close their computer, to stay with them?
I think in general, what we need to understand that this kind of crisis, they have opportunities as well. And there are winners and not only losers. Okay, obviously Cyprus, if I take Cyprus, Cyprus has taken all the right steps in the medical sector, I would say, and is trying to support the economy with measures that all the European Union countries are taking. What we really need to do now is to continue to be serious, and I totally agree with George Appiu's comments, by the way, and we need to focus on how we can exploit the opportunities and the new things that are coming up from this crisis, because there has been a technology leap, and this technology leap will provide opportunities to the countries and businesses that manage to exploit this. So I think that should be the central message.
Thank you, Marius. Dmitry?
Well, just in contrast, not to be so positive, And speaking about other, no, not in a way about the recovery or anything like that. About, since my specialty is anyways investment advice, investment ideas, about something to think. The rise of the global protectionism as opposed to the globalism, and all the monetary measures we've mentioned during our speeches and panel discussions, obviously will rise to tensions. And tensions, usually resolved in not the most peaceful ways. So again, as odd as it sounds, as bad as it sounds, and I feel like the doom preacher today with all the debt collection, everything like this. Defense sector is again something which may benefit in a growing uncertainty, and that again may be an opportunity to consider. Speaking about the recovery and everything, personally different because I'm looking at a lot of markets on Cyprus only. Cyprus had very good IP box program, and the way forward would be to work in this direction. Stop paying so much attention to real estate and speak more intellectual property and how to attract the community. It's already very big. The biggest Russian-speaking IT community abroad is in Cyprus. But there's still some room to improve, and that's going to give a push to the whole economy. That's my perception.
Thank you, Dmitry. Andreas.
A lot of changes are on the table. Some of them are like elastic band. We're going to roll back in the old ways, but most of the changes that COVID brought forward are, there is no going back. This presents us with a lot of opportunities, and the opportunities are here for our companies, for Cyprus as a country, but also for the investors watching us. I believe that speed and responsiveness to these opportunities is critical. So if I may borrow from an Arabic proverb that I came across the last few days, where they actually fish for pearls, they say, he who will enter the water first after a big storm is always a tough question. But this is the time when the pearls of opportunity are the most plentiful. So I believe that this is the time when we can actually systematically go for the opportunities at all levels, company, country, and investors. And I see COVID-19 as a two-sided coin. Invest 2020 and beyond is the other side of the coin that I like to see.
All right. Okay, George.
I'm more, I will escape from my presentation conclusion and say that I'm more traditional in looking at things. If we look at the history of not just the world as we know it, but the planet of Earth, I mean, billions of years, there have been events that changed the world. I don't think this event is of the magnitude of the dinosaurs disappearing, of the first man appearing, of the invention of the wheel. It is an event, but don't forget we had a similar pandemic about 100 years ago when I think 2 million people died in Europe. And then the world just restarted, and nothing will change the habits of human beings, which are social species. And the technology and the museums walking in rooms will not be able to replace the physical presence of standing in front of a painting with your children, looking at the painting. Nothing will replace that. My wife is a teacher. She had been teaching over the internet with Teams for the past 2 months. They went back to school. She came back the first week. She said, nothing will ever replace the physical teaching in the classroom, nothing. And that is the conclusion of just the teaching profession. And I think similar things we will find in other professions, and we will not be able to work from home across. Deals on M&As will not be concluded if people do not meet and chat and flirt each other.
Sure, thank you. Omiros.
Yeah, I mean, like every event of this magnitude, there's many lessons to take home, and I think the lessons are not that dissimilar between countries. Obviously, every country responded differently. If we were to focus on Cyprus, I think we have done a good job, and I think we stand to gain out of this, and this may answer some of the questions in relation to the fund's opportunity for Cyprus. I think Cyprus will gain out of this. At the same time, as we see in Cyprus and in other countries, what Andreas said before, the time to respond is very crucial, and the way and the magnitude of the response. So one would expect that we have come out wiser out of this. Otherwise, we may do the same mistakes in the future. And as it relates to the sectors to invest, at the end of the day, this is an investment forum. I would say that nothing replaces, the due diligence and the proactiveness with which every investment should be approached. If anything, it's even more important to be aware of these fundamental principles in a world that is becoming more and more united, and where shocks can affect every country and every company quite quickly.
Thank you. All right, I would like to thank all of you for your contribution to today's conversation. It was very interesting, and all our attendees for being with us. Now, what we need to do, all of us, me included, we need to copy the link which you see in the webinar chat. So I will be here until everyone copies this link, copy it, not to be lost. And then we will close this chat and we will go for coffee break. To another chat when we can talk with everyone freely. All right, so everyone has copied. And we are moving. Thank you very much for today's conversation. Bye-bye. All the best. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Okay, so I will end the conversation.